as we've done before, let's open the floor to the students first if they got any questions, and then we'll open it to the general folks. Sorry, that's...
Have we actually? There we go.
Yeah. Oh, here we go. Okay.
Hi, I just have a quick question about something you mentioned in the presentation. You said that only 10 to 15% of the water flows back. So what happens to the 90 to 85% of the water that is pumped into the deep formation?
That's a good question. Apparently, it stays in the formation, or it may come out. It may come out over time. The ideal way to develop the resource would be to get it all out because it blocks the formation. So they're not exactly sure what happens to it. The fractures radiate out from the horizontal wellbore, and the water goes up into those fractures, and then presumably stays in that formation. It may even it may be a definitional question. In other words, the flow back, we call it hydrofrack flow back, and then we go into production, and now it's production water. So the regulatory agencies, for example, are debating how to divide up flowback water from production water. Is it truly production water, or is it really the flowback water that's slowly coming out of the formation? And that water that's staying in the formation may be reacting with other minerals in the formation to form other products. The theory is that it may be that might be the reason why you're seeing more radioactive materials later on, once they stay in a formation for 30 or 60 or 90 days. I really don't know. Can you, did I answer that?
That's pretty good. I mean, from an engineering perspective, from an engineering perspective, the simple way to explain some of the water staying there is sort of like when you dump water on block. You know, it's sort of, it doesn't all, some runs off of it, some just soaks into the block. Well, some of this water actually, the formation's so dry that it actually absorbs into the formation.
Well, my concern was since the formation is so deep and the water is pumped into there, the fresh water, don't we want to get it back because the fresh water would all waste it?
You don't want to waste the fresh water from the surface? Well, I could give you the simple engineering answer. There's been a lot of water used on this surface, and we aren't missing any. So it's like replaced through the hydrologic cycle. Why? Well, because most of that water, what they want to do is minimize the drainage down into the aquifer from septic systems.
Yeah, now we're talking, just to be clear about this, we're talking about 5,000 feet below the surface. And the water table is at 500 feet. So we're talking about we're not talking about any communication of that water with the, and that's what I'm talking about with Darcy's law. So that water in the formation with the contaminated material in it, with the chemicals in it, can't reach the fresh water vertically. We understand that?
Yeah, my concern was the opposite, that it doesn't go back in the cycle and we don't have that water.
Well, I guess I'd have to say what John said is that this may be an issue in Texas, places where it's arid, and they do have different view of water. Water is like, and the other problem, not to divert from your question, but we have a tremendous amount of water in this country, and if the golf courses are using 10 times as much as Marcellus, that's not to say we should be wasting water, but it's not significant in the bigger scheme of things. In Texas, they may have the need, and I know of a company that has a need, if they want to get water, it's 150 miles away. And trucks it costs a lot of money to transport by truck. So whatever they can do to recycle and reuse, they do. And we may be actually bidding on a project to help them recycle water.
Okay, any other student questions? Thank you. Well, okay, so let's open the floor to questions from the audience then, general audience.
One thing I should have pointed out to you, this Twin Tiers Landowner Coalition site, if you want to keep up with the news, I go through pretty much the clips every day. And if you want to keep up, there's a news link at the twintlc.com. You'll see kind of the news that's important for New York and Pennsylvania. Yep.
Finger Lakes area, beautiful, pristine lakes. And they are on a fault line. There have been an earthquake that has impacted on that area, 2 of them. So what guarantee can you make that an earthquake wouldn't cause the concrete to crack and those chemicals get into those beautiful lakes and contaminate them forever?
Are you talking about wellbore cracking, you mean? In a wellbore? There's no guarantees in life. If you had an earthquake like that, it would probably, and it had the ability to crack the concrete in a wellbore, there'd be much more significant damage at the surface. Your town would be wiped out, pretty much. So I don't think it's a, we've got an earthquake expert in the room, I think, and Bob Jacoby, have we not? Yeah, there he is. You want to answer the question?
The problem would be how far out is that fracturing system extending from the wellbore, even if you have an earthquake that destroys some of the cement casing, most of that frac fluid is down at the bottom, not on the, coming up the outside of the casing around the aneurysm. So I don't think it's going to affect the surface very much, if ever, from an earthquake. Especially the size, the ones that have been in that part of New York so far have been small. As you know, I've argued that we probably underestimate the earthquake ability of New York State. But still, there haven't been too many in the Finger Lakes. Does that help?
In response to that, I would say they weren't expecting a 9-point earthquake in Japan.
Yeah, but some of us have always thought, no, you're totally right that they didn't engineer for a 9, but everyone assumes that where you have not had an earthquake for 1,000 years, you're going to have a big one. That was just hoping, that was hope over there, that it wouldn't happen.
Yeah, I think the point is that the hydrofracking process takes a few weeks, and once it's over, it's really there's nothing that's going to come back. It can't travel vertically unless it comes through the wellbore. So in that case, I just don't see that it's that big a deal. I think I think there are just bigger problems to worry about than earthquakes. That it's not really significant in terms of being able to fracture a pipe in the vertical direction. You'd have to almost be right on top of the fault zone. Right. Well, that's your business. That's not mine.
Yeah, I guess it's more of a response to the earthquake scenario. I guess I would personally be more concerned about all the above-ground gasoline tanks, fuel tanks, other chemicals. I wouldn't be really concerned about 5,000-foot depth.
Last week. Marcus, can you get there?
Yeah.
Do you think there's a point in time where we're going to get back in these wells and refract them or flush them out to produce more?
Which wells are you talking about now?
The fracked wells, the horizontal portion.
Well, they haven't been drilled. The Marcellus wells haven't been, the Marcellus horizontal wells haven't been drilled. There have been a couple drilled in the state, I believe, but they were not issued permits.
Oh, okay, I'll re-ask the question then for Pennsylvania. Do you think there'll be a time when we get in and when Pennsylvania gets in and refracts those wells, cleans them out, flushes them out to produce more gas?
I'm not sure I understand what you're trying to say. They already fracked the wells in Pennsylvania.
Correct. You left the fluids in there and maybe they solidified. You didn't get all the water out. You stated that tonight.
Oh, you mean, are they ever going to go back in and refract the well?
Yes, or try to flush them out, wash them out to get more gas.
I don't know. The technology keeps changing, so that could possibly happen. I don't think it's in the cards for the foreseeable future. The water is not a significant problem being in the formation. Yes, it would probably add to the production of the flush production, but the way in which these wells seem to operate is there is very good production in the early years, and it kind of asymptotic. You know what I'm trying to say.
Right, and
Keeps
last
on
week we discussed that it's felt that there's only 10 or 15% of the gas is being extracted.
I didn't say that.
No, that was last week.
You have to ask the guy from last week.
The attorney said that last week, I think.
Well, I don't know that number. Do you want to answer that, or?
That's the production number that I have on average from Pennsylvania. John, your assessment of that?
That's the number you're talking about you're calculating the amount you're recovering versus the amount that's actually possibly in there from a gas in place perspective. And it's more likely that they'll drill other well bores in another
Right.
manner than to go into the existing ones, unless they come up with a way. And they're already doing that. Greg mentioned they're doing more of those stages in a single horizontal well bore. That's an indication of they're trying to actually stimulate as much of that horizontal section as we can. So that's what you're seeing. That's the answer to your question. You're probably less likely to see somebody else go back in, unless what they'll do is they'll go into the ones that they drilled in the initial phase, where they may have had 3 stages or 4 stages, and now they look and they progress to 10 or 12 stages. They can go do more.
Okay, thank you.
So the one thing I'd say to you is, I guess what I'm hearing now is analogous to oil in place, and what's been recovered in the state of New York, for example, is an average of about 22 to 25% maybe of the oil in place. So if someone came up with a technique to increase the old oil wells, even 1%, they would be rich people very quickly. So it isn't as if you get 100% of any resource out of the ground. You reach an economic and a geologic limit. And that's why you have secondary recovery in oil and tertiary recovery in oil, and those kinds of processes which get up to, what, 32, 35% in some cases in Texas, something like that. So, but they cost money. So yeah, you produce $50,000 worth of oil, but you spend $150,000 getting at it. That's not atypical.
Well, sometimes the money equations change pretty quickly.
Well, true. But if you want to put up the 150,000 to go after 50,000, I'm sure you can find somebody in this room that'll take your money. That's what I'm saying. I mean, really, it is. That's exactly what they do. They make here's the man right here. I mean, this is the guy that's spent pretty much his lifetime working with depleted Medina wells to get additional production from those Medina wells, correct? And he's tried all kinds of different techniques to do that, to make those wells more productive and to recover more resource.
Okay, my next question I want to direct at the Twin Tiers man. Is that you? You're the...
Well, yes.
Okay, now I have to state this correctly.
I'm the consultant to the Twin Tier. I'm not the principal.
Is there any heavily regulated and illegal New York gas being extracted by unregulated Pennsylvania well operators?
I very much doubt it.
Well, they're horizontal drilling, right, in Pennsylvania?
Oh, no. They would never get a permit to horizontal drill. You mean under the New York border?
Or close
No.
to it.
Couldn't happen.
How about close?
No. There's an agreement in place that we signed some years ago, which says that they can't issue a permit within, I want to say 330 feet, but I think it's 660 feet from the border on either side to preclude just that. So Pennsylvania DEP would never issue a horizontal well for them to recover any gas on our side.
But they don't inspect the wells either.
Well, they do, but you know, it isn't like you can just hide something like that. You're spending $3 or $4 million to try to recover gas. Everybody knows what your plan is. I mean, all the drilling company, the frack company, whatever. I mean, it just wouldn't happen.
Got a question back here.
A quick, easy question, and then a little longer one. How do you define groundwater?
I don't know. I don't know if there's a legal definition to it. But it's water that's usually within 500 feet of the surface that may or may not be used for potable water. I'm not sure. Jerry Palumbo, do you know? Yeah, he's the water. He was the former water guy at DEC, so he's the man. He was the man.
This wasn't my second question. It's a follow-up to your first one, is that I've spoken to people who have farms in Erie County, and vertical wells have been fracked on their property, and the water is now on their property and their grass won't grow. And there's frack pits, and the frack pits split open. So when you said there was zero problems with the water, with the frack water affecting groundwater, were you including those in your comment?
No, but if did they complain to DEC?
I believe they did, because I spoke to people who assisted them with the complaint, so I'm sure they've already made the
Okay.
complaint.
No, I wasn't including surface spills. I was talking about the water in the well bore, in the horizontal leg, getting back up into the groundwater,
Okay.
or getting through the well bore itself. There's really only one way the water can get up there, and that's through the well bore. If the well bore is cased and cemented properly, then there's no way that there's going to be any communication with that groundwater. Zero chance.
Okay, my second question is, you're talking about 9,000 feet below the ground, and somebody mentioned 5,000 feet. The Bartlett Shale Formation, I don't think is that deep below the ground. And also, so if somebody could specifically say how deep it is, I heard it was 50 feet. The other thing is that Marcellus, New York, and Utica, New York are named Marcellus and Utica because the shale formations come to the surface at those locations.
Right.
Which is not 9,000 feet below. So is there a reason you're not commenting on levels above 5,000 feet?
Well, the issue has been, first of all, those formations, the Marcellus, I mean, if it's at the surface, there's not going to be any gas in it. So they probably won't be drilling any wells that are less than 2,000 or 3,000. I mean, we don't even know that yet. What's that? Yeah, 2,500, yeah. So even in that case, but let me point you to a very, very good study. Pinnacle did a study. Pinnacle Resources, maybe. They're a division of Halliburton. They did a study where they actually measured the size, the distance from the wellbore that the fractures went. And if you look at the spacing in New York for the Marcellus, we're talking about 300 feet away, 330 feet away being the outside limits of a frack. Now, that's kind of an average, so that, I mean, that's a regulatory number. That's really not the real number. It's something in between that, around 300, let's say. But they did a study, and they actually graphed out all of the different formations and all of the fractures that they had done. It's the first time I've ever really seen that. That Pinnacle study showed that there were no wells within, there were no distances within less than, I think, 4,000 or 4,500 feet maybe between the frack and the fresh water. So that verified what the theoretical view was about the distance between the fresh water and the frack. And that graph, I actually have a copy of that study on the Twin Tiers website. If you look in the download section, you can see that it came out of the Oil and Gas Journal. And it's really quite interesting.
Do you mean Barnett?
Barnett? I don't really know. I can't. Barnett, how deep is Barnett?
The drilling part of the Barnett that they focused on is 8,000 feet.
Yeah.
6,000 to 8,000.
That's what I thought. I thought it was about the same.
Most of the reason, just, for everybody's information, the reason the depth matters, the reason they're looking at these deeper formations is because that's where you get the quality of reservoir pressure. You get the quality of reservoir pressure and the quantity of gas needed to make it economic. As it gets shallower, you're going to get less gas storage in the reservoir, so it's less likely to make economic wells, even with horizontal wells. I mean, the shallowest shale being developed now is in Arkansas. The Fayetteville Shale in Arkansas is, anywhere from probably 2,800 feet to 3,500 feet vertical depth. Some of them even shallower, but, and the only problem that people make reference to in Arkansas is they've drilled some deeper disposal wells, and that seems to be an issue in Arkansas. But there hasn't been any issues with groundwater contamination from the horizontals.
That's why you're running?
Does the U.S. EPA underground injection control permit process apply to gas wells?
No. The underground injection control program is specific to, there's 3 or 4 different classes of wells. Class 2 injection wells, Class 3, I think, is salt wells. I'm going back now, so I can't remember. Class 4, is it maybe anything else? 2D, yeah. Disposal well, right. 2D is, that's right. 2D is the brine disposal wells. And the theory is the under the safe drinking, everybody talks about these exemptions under the safe drinking water. Well, there never was an exemption because all of this is fantasy. There was never an exemption because disposal, the oil and gas drilling wells And hydrofracking is not disposal. A disposal well, they're putting brine or any other hazardous waste or whatever in the 2D is the brine wells, but the other hazardous, more hazardous wells, is it 6? I think it's class 6, I don't remember, but in any event, that's the purpose of that. Now, let me tell you that we had to teach EPA how to design the well bore and how to protect the well bore. So we bring the guys up from New York City, we say, look, this is how you got to do this, because this is what's important. And so we showed them all that and whatever. Then people get the idea, and that's why I say to you, this EPA study with regard to hydrofracking, let's think of it. First of all, they're not going to find anything, they're not going to find any incidents of wells that have, from hydrofracking, that have contaminated groundwater. So then they're left with saving face. So they're going to save face by disclosure of chemicals, which is a good thing, which the states are kind of already doing. And by the way, there's a brand new website called frackfocus.org, O-R-G. Just up the last couple of weeks, it's a vehicle of, I have some other websites if you want to, but it's a vehicle of the IOG, the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission, and I believe the Groundwater Protection Council. And you can go there, and what's going to happen is that the companies have volunteered to put their well on there, and you can look in there and see all the additives that have been used on that well. So, I skipped over something. What I was saying to you is that these Class 2 injection wells, the reason that EPA can't do anything in terms of their study, other than the two things that I mentioned, one was the disclosure, and the second was that they may come up with pre-treatment standards, which probably won't apply to New York because ours are probably more stringent than they're ever going to come up with anyway, to be honest about it. We already have, I believe, a barium standard that's 1 ppm. I believe Pennsylvania is 10 ppm, and it might be on a 30-day average. So there's a huge difference. So, but when you look at things from a regulatory standpoint, you say to yourself, okay, what can EPA do that the state is not already doing? What is it that they're going to do other than shuffle paper? Are they going to improve the environment by requiring something? And that's a regulator's mentality. You always, everybody says something to you, but you got to think of it. You got to see the data, and you got to think of it that way. And so, in this case, if we're already casing and cementing the well, and we know that there's been no contamination since 1980 of any wells drilled in the state, then what is it that they're going to do different than we don't already do? And what further protection can they come up with that would make any sense without creating a whole regulatory scheme and making the oil and gas operators go through that? It just doesn't make any sense. That's really why, if you follow the history of oil and gas regulation, you'll see that it's at the state level. And it's at the state level because it's the state that has to do the spacing of wells, that doesn't respect property boundaries, and that's why all these discussions about zoning and all that really are not relevant in terms of oil and gas development. And in fact, they're superseded, in my opinion. And God bless you if you want to go to court and spend your money to fight this. It's something that's been in place for 40 years. But the fact of the matter is that it's a state that doesn't recognize the town boundary or the property boundary. Recognize the unit boundary, which may include two properties. They're the ones that have to set the spacing between and among municipalities. And all these issues really came to the fore before 1981, and that's why it resulted in the supersedure provision, which says, again, the state supersedes all local regulation with the exception of taxation and local roads. And by the way, the taxation was taken care of by the Office of Real Property Tax Services in the companion bill, so that there's a uniform way in which we tax oil and gas in the state. And by the way, it's the Division of Mineral Resources that collects all the data that sets the stage for that. So the division actually collects the data from the operators, which is then distributed to the Office of Real Property Tax Services, distributed to the Public Service Commission, which then goes back to the county assessor, which then goes back to the town and distributes the money to the town. All those functions are done by that little division.
Hi. This past weekend on Google Alerts, they talked about the gas frack company and the gelled petroleum they have invented with better recovery rates. The reason I bring it up is, like in Allegheny County, in the southeast, it's looking pretty good. We in the northwest are sort of curious about how hard should we hold out on our rates for leasing because we're thinner there. The shale is thinner. Will that make enough economic difference for areas like ours so that we should really, wait for them to pitch us a good one in terms of price?
I have no idea.
Does anyone in UB have an idea that's familiar with that?
You're really asking a question that can't be answered. I mean, you just don't know. It's like buying a car. You go in and you make your best deal at the time, and you walk away. You can't keep checking the prices every month and say, "Damn, I should have bought it this month, or I should have bought it last month." It's like anything else. It's a contract. Now, what happened, of course, in this case, is the technology advance where we never thought it'd be economic, and with these shales, and all of a sudden, people are being millionaires in Pennsylvania. And then, one land group took $92 million in bonus. That's up front. $92 million for, I don't know how many acres, but it was a substantial amount of acreage. But that's an awful lot of money to pour into a community for the first bonus, never mind the royalties. So you really can't answer that. And I wouldn't begin to, I don't know about the frack company, I don't know. Just can't answer that.
I was curious, you said something about pits for storage for the byproducts of the fracking that are recaptured? That wouldn't happen, that they're stored in tanks?
Yeah, the flow back, any of the, you can have a pit this is the proposed, which I don't believe is going to change. This is the proposed SGEIS, what's in there now. And that's in the, either in Chapter 6, or in the Appendix 6 or Appendix 10. But any of the flow back, the frack fluids, will go to tanks, not to the ground. The pits can be used for drilling fluids. In other words, when you drill the well, you can put it in a pit. And when you may have a water impoundment you can have water to bring to the to use in the hydrofrack operation. You can have a pit, but that's about it. All the frack fluids will be captured in tanks.
Just to clarify, so none of the toxic, the chemicals would be outside of a tank? Would they be qualified to go in a pit?
No.
No. So
not under the current proposal. All the hydrofracture fluids would go into tanks.
And where are those tanks? Where do they exist, or where would they exist?
Well, they'd be on site when we got to drilling. They aren't necessarily in Pennsylvania, if you're asking that.
No. I'm just wondering, are they going to be buried somewhere?
No, they'll be above ground pits, above ground tanks. Now, there have been many different, there are some people building 30,000 gallon tanks, I guess, and even building concrete pads in Pennsylvania. So again, everybody's got a different mousetrap. So if they're required in New York, I think you'll see some bigger sized tanks than we currently have. But you can buy tanks off the shelf for whether they can take frack fluids, whether they can hold frack fluids or not, I don't know. Yeah, 500 500 barrel. I have seen some much bigger tanks that have been, let's say, thought about. Yeah, they would be there. That's right. I mean, they would be there temporarily until all the wells are drilled and fracked. But that could be 3 years under this scenario if you're allowed to. You'd have to have a fluid plan, a fluid disposal plan, so the tanks may be empty, but the tanks may be there for 3 years. Whether they're going to tell them they have to put the production fluids from that in the tanks, I'm not clear on that. I think they probably will. Okay. Yeah, that's right. It's already there. So all that's going to be tanked. Well, they have to have a disposal plan. No, it has to be taken off. It has to be either disposed of in a treatment plant or taken to Ohio to a facility. Or, they do, this is a big, they put them in rail cars and take them to Texas. I mean, they're moving if there's a way to move stuff, they're going to find a way to move it. There's all kinds of different things going on in Pennsylvania. Oh, absolutely not.
We got a few more questions, and then maybe we should try to wrap it up back here.
Yes, typically in Pennsylvania, where do they actually get the water to do the fracking? And is it always fresh water that they use?
Well, there are different. First of all, it depends on whether or not there's a jurisdiction involved. If the Susquehanna River Basins Commission, for example, is involved, then they have to go to the Susquehanna River Basins Commission and file a permit to either take it from the river or to drill a water well, a supply well. There are companies using kind of like pond water, and they're using an herbicide or something to get rid of any of the impurities that they want to get rid of. There are some companies that have put together some major, kind of like a pipeline, a water supply pipeline, where they are sending water all over the place within an area because the company, these companies are spending hundreds of millions of dollars, in some cases, hundreds of millions of dollars a month. Well, I shouldn't say that much, but there are. This is big business, and what happens is they will drill a whole area at a time, and so if they drill a whole area at a time, they have the ability to put a central water impoundment. I've seen these porta dams that they've been using. It's an above ground, kind of like an above ground swimming pool that they fill with water and use that. So there's a whole variety of different things. They're trying to, in most cases, they're trying to get them to use water out of a treatment plant rather than fresh water, grayish water more, I'd say, than the regular water. Doesn't have to be pure water. The water that comes back from the frack, by the way, has the chemicals in it, but it's all salt water. So once you take the chemicals out of that, like I said with Lake Country, we could take the barium and strontium out. And the reason you take the barium and strontium out is because it crystallizes in the formation and blocks the formation. It may be a problem, it may not be a problem, and there's some debate about that. But the fact of the matter is they're reusing that salt water and putting it back down the wellbore. So at the end of the line, then that full tank, after they've done all the fracks on that job, they'll take that to a disposal plant.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up with, I listened to a guy by the name of Walter Hang. I wasn't real impressed in what he had to say, but he claimed that...
Wait a minute. Did you say you were impressed or were not?
I wasn't.
Okay, good.
Okay. He claims that there's a possibility of 260 chemicals that could be used with the water in hydrofracking. He claimed that hydrofracking does cause benzene, and that it had a good chance of contaminating the water supply. What's your take on that?
Well, I don't like to criticize somebody who's not here. Let me just say that he has a penchant for taking statistics and twisting them around, and he issued a statement about the number of spills at oil and gas well sites back about a year ago in New York, which was totally and completely erroneous. And there was a response from the department of about 6 pages of refuting everything he said. So I would not take what he says as gospel, as you shouldn't anyway. I don't know what he's talking about with regard to benzene, whether there are some, there could be impurities in the gas that include some oil in the shales. That's not that unusual. There are a number of chemicals that are being used. Those chemicals are listed in the SGIS. In fact, they went overboard and listed a bunch of, they made some mistakes and listed some things that shouldn't have been on that list and some stuff that's pretty old. So I don't think that's really that big a deal. You know, it's like having different names for different products. There are basically 4 types of chemicals that go into a frack. Bactericides, surfactants, algicides, and help me out here. What did I leave out? Friction reducers. That's about it. Now, what do you want to call, truth be told, these guys all have their own secret formula, double secret formula. And I'm sure that's all true. Whether they need all the chemicals for all that and what they charge the customer for all that, I don't know.
Greg, we have another.
Yep. Yeah. Maybe just 1 or 2 more now. It's getting close to 10 here.
Yes, thank you. I really enjoyed your talk. I feel I get more comfort from New York than Pennsylvania. As a regulator myself, as part of the state system, and I feel that I'm glad to see that New York is really taking a real close look at this. My question is, what is the plan, from your experience, your wealth of experience, what is the plan in handling the wastewater? And how much of that wastewater do you envision, based on industry plans, if they do come in New York, how is that going to be treated? How much of it's going to, and my understanding is that there's no wastewater treatment plant that could actually handle it. Some of the things that I've read, maybe I'm I'm still learning as I go, but it seems like there is quite a lack of transparency in some respects with the industry as far as what is in the frack water as it returns.
Well, as I said, there's everybody looking at all these different systems: distillation, osmosis, ozonation. Ozonation can take care of a lot of the impurities. Our company, which takes barium and strontium out, some of these, the water treatment plants in the state had to do what's called a headworks analysis about a year ago to be able to treat these, be able to show that they can treat these things. Whether the standards are going to stay the same or not, I don't know. I can tell you one thing: there will not be any dumping of any of these waters in the state. So, under worst case, they would ship them to Ohio, or ship them to a deep well disposal someplace, or ship them to Pennsylvania if they've got their stuff straightened out. The problem is, how do you expect a company to make an investment in New York when you don't even have the green light to do anything in New York? And the companies, if you think about the companies, the gas companies, they've signed leases for 5 years, and they aren't able to drill their wells. So their investment, they've either got a force majeure, which means that they can halt because of the regulatory process. They can extend the lease, or they've lost their money. What do they say to their? They don't have any choice in not pursuing that, because they've got a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders. They can't just let everybody walk away with $100 million, $200 million. Say, well, you know, what the heck, it just happened that way. So I'm sorry to be, you know, there's just a number of different issues that need to be resolved, including the standards that are going to be acceptable before people are going to invest in the state of New York. And I very much hope that the gas companies come back to the state of New York. That is not a given the investment climate and given the kind of lack of leadership that we've had on this issue for a couple of years.
Maybe just one more question over here. And then, don't forget as you leave, the students out there have your sugar kit for you, ladies. So please take advantage.
Any beer?
How are the operators complying with the Clean Water Act, Section 404, administered by the Corps of Engineers when they need to fill a stream or a wetland in order to put a road back in or put a utility line in? Or
it's no different than any other industry. They have to comply, and I don't know where this is another fallacy that they don't have to comply with everything else. If you need you know, it doesn't matter what industry you're in. If you need a stream protection permit, or you're gonna fill a bank or whatever, you need a permit from the Corps, and you may need a permit from DEC, an Article 15 permit. So they're no different from any other industry. In fact, I would say I'm sorry, but there is no such thing as a Halliburton loophole. It is a fallacy. What's that? Let me tell you what the Halliburton. Let me tell you how this started. This started because the question I had about the Safe Drinking Water Act over here. The question was, what is the Safe Drinking Water Act? There was a court case in Alabama where there was a question, there was a lawsuit about hydrofracking and the need to comply with the Safe Drinking Water Act. And that went through the courts, and I think it got to the Supreme Court, did it not, Michael? Do you know? I did get to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled this. They said, no, this is not this is not disposal. And so the only reason that idea is there is just to clarify the fact that hydrofracking is not disposal, and therefore it is not subject to the Safe Drinking Water Act. That's all it was. There is no such thing as being exempt from any of the clean air requirements or clean water requirements. In fact, I would say that they're probably the most heavily, the oil and gas industry is probably the most heavily regulated industry that we have, in addition to stormwater, stream protection, Clean Water Act. They can't discharge. You can't discharge in the state of New York without a speedies permit.